Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Katharine Huffman. I'm the Executive Director of the Square One Project, also a Managing Principal of the space that we're in here. We're a policy and communications firm that works on a range of issues, and a lot of our work is in support of Square One at this time. We're just so delighted to have everyone here with us for our event today. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of background about Square One. Many of you in this room are familiar with Square One. Many of you have been a part of it in a lot of different ways over the past 6 years. As we jokingly say, we are 6 years into a 3-year project, and it's going great. Square One is a narrative change initiative that is designed to get all of us thinking about what would it look like if we responded to violence, to the things we call crime, to racism, to poverty in an entirely new way. What if we put aside the punitive responses that we currently respond to all of those things with, and instead think about starting from a new square one? What would that look like? And over the past 6 years, through many different series of convenings, many different types of projects, many different ways of testing out the ideas and values that are coming out of this project, we've been designing and figuring out what are new ways to think about these problems. Thinking about the ways that this is not a consensus project, but the idea that the leadership of communities is the way to find the answers to those questions has been a dominant theme in our work since the very beginning, and it's only grown stronger over the years as we've seen the ways in which communities are leading to a different way of creating safety, of creating justice, of finding ways to prevent danger and harm to people within communities, and finding ways to heal. So we're really, really excited to be having this conversation today, where we all get to think and talk and learn together about what this looks like in the context of community-led solutions. We have an incredible panel that I'll be introducing in just a few minutes, but we're going to start off today with some remarks from Amy Solomon, the woman who needs no introduction for many years. Amy Solomon is currently the Assistant Attorney General of OJP at the Department of Justice and doing incredible work there. Prior to that, she was working at Arnold Ventures with others who are in this room right now. And before that was working as the Executive Director of the Federal Interagency Reentry Council and many other things before that. That's a very medium-length way of saying this woman knows how government works, she knows how communities are supported or not supported by government, and she knows the ways that change can be made. And so we're just really honored and delighted, Amy, to have you here today to share some thoughts about the ways in which we can create community-led safety. So, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for hosting. It's humbling to be in this room with so many colleagues and mentors over so many years. But I'm really privileged to be here. I want to thank Columbia Justice Lab and Square One and all the people who put this together, and more importantly, for your leadership over these years and your willingness to help us, challenge us to boldly reimagine safety and justice in America. Square One, as you just heard, was launched at a time that feels like a different era. It was 2018, a decade into what felt like really encouraging bipartisan reform. The momentum was strong at the time, and we felt that more was possible. And Square One emerged in that moment with the goal of rethinking safety and justice in a big way. It pushed us to think beyond tinkering, and instead challenged us to imagine what our response to crime would look like if we stepped back, way back, and reimagined safety. How would we reimagine if we had the chance? So Square One inspired us to conceive of a future that elevates the principles of equity, of truth-telling, of parsimony, of human dignity as central to safety and justice. To consider what's possible if our center of gravity really changed and shifted from the criminal legal system to the community, to the organizations, the institutions, and the people who have a deep and vested interest in creating opportunity and improving lives in their home neighborhoods. It goes without saying that a lot has changed since that time. There were the shape-shifting events of 2020, COVID, of course, and the once-in-a-generation protests that followed the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and too many others, igniting an unprecedented social movement towards community-led and equity-driven approach to community safety. And at that time, go back, commitments were made from government, from foundations, from corporations, for more greater racial justice and at a much greater scale. We heard discussion about tapping into the power of CBOs and non-justice system actors to provide alternative responses, behavioral health treatment, violence interventions, trauma recovery, and social services. That movement was grounded in values, but it also was rooted in evidence. Researchers like Pat Sharkey documented community-based organizations as a driving force behind the great crime decline of the 1990s and 2000s, finding a causal link, a stronger community safety infrastructure in the form of nonprofits correlated with reductions in violent crime. But after 2020, we also saw a counter reaction. Rising violent crime and serious disruptions to social connection coalesced to form a backlash to reform. And shockingly quickly, all of that momentum that had been generated quickly waned. President Biden took office in the midst of all of this, and many of us joined the administration with the hope and the drive to reclaim that momentum, while at the same time addressing the realities of rising violence. The president called on Americans to, quote, come together and protect our communities, to restore trust, and urged us not to abandon our streets or choose between safety and equal justice. And at OJP, we took this call to heart. And we have been seeking new ways to advance the twin goals of keeping communities safe and promoting equity in our approach. We are taking into account the historic underinvestment in underserved and marginalized communities, and we have been working to expand investments directly in these communities, in the organizations that reflect them, that are designed to serve them, are located within them, and are closest to the problems that we seek to solve. We cemented this commitment in a new policy blueprint that was forward-looking and a new mission statement for OJP. OJP is there to provide resources, leadership, and solutions to advance community safety, to build community trust, and to strengthen the community's role as co-producer of safety and justice. And the focus here on community is emphatically deliberate. Throughout its history, OJP has made substantial and strategic investments in our criminal and juvenile justice systems, helping to make each part more fair, more just, more equitable, more efficient in achieving safety and justice. And this approach remains central, as focusing on systems is really the only way to scale innovation and evidence-based practices. But we have not made the same investments in community. By explicitly embracing the community's role as co-producer of safety and justice, we are expanding the scope of responsibility and possibility for the future of our communities. We are bringing communities that are disproportionately impacted by crime, violence, and victimization to the forefront of our strategy and broadening our concept of safety from the mere absence of crime to the presence of thriving neighborhoods and greater opportunity for all. This means thinking about how we at OJP can better center CBOs and community residents, because we know they're essential to building protective factors, to building trust, to building stronger neighborhoods, and building the political will to engage in and sustain violence prevention efforts over the long term. We know that they have by definition, the close, personal, and authentic ties to residents, and that they have the trust of the people that they serve. This perhaps makes community-based messengers the most effective partners in delivering high-impact interventions. Centering community also eases the outsized burden on police so that they can focus on their core duties and skills to reduce and solve violent crime. I was recently on a call with Chief Ernest Cato, who you're going to hear from in just a few minutes, and he said police can't solve the problem alone. The community is the solution. So you know this. people in this room know this. Many of you have shown what's possible in a shared safety model, when the community takes its role at the center of the public safety landscape. This concept is your concept. This is Justice Reimagined. And I am here to tell you that we are embracing it at the Office of Justice Programs. So I want to spend just a few minutes sharing how we're putting this mission into action at OJP and challenging a much broader set of actors to do the same. So starting with solicitations. First, we're designing programs that bring investments to a larger and deeper bench of community-based organizations and approaches. So I'm proud to say we have many examples here to draw on, and I want to walk through a couple just to show our work here, starting with the Community Violence Intervention, or CVI. So 2 years ago, we launched the federal CVI initiative, and drawing on the deep expertise of many of you, OJP's funding strategy is shaped to be community-driven, community-centered, and equity-focused. So far, we've invested over $200 million via the collective efforts of the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, the Office for Victims of Crime, and the National Institute of Justice, and the leadership of Eddie Bocanegra. And I just want to say that somehow we have the leaders of those organizations here in this room. So Carlton Moore, Chris Rose, Liz Ryan, Eddie Bocanegra. It's amazing to have their support and their leadership working together on these issues. And I also want to acknowledge Betsy Curl, Deputy Chief of Staff and close colleague on these issues, and our Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General, Brent Cohn. It's an amazing team. And together, just through the CVI work alone, we've funded 76 sites in 29 states and territories to deliver services and support to people at the highest risk of violence. And grantees include, to a great extent, community-based organizations and city-led collaboratives that both seed new efforts and expand the reach of established interventions. And I have had the opportunity to travel the country with Eddie and seen many CVI initiatives in action. And everywhere I go, I'm so moved by the commitment, the resolve, and the hope that CVI leaders and staff bring to this work. They tell us that instinctively they react like firefighters to emergency calls, even though they're repeatedly exposed to violence and trauma. And still, somehow, everywhere we go, we hear about the optimism they feel and the faith that they hold for an end to gun violence, and how they'll continue to plant seeds of hope in some of the hardest hit neighborhoods. This is community in action, and I'm so proud that we are delivering and supporting this kind of work. We've also launched a new program. It's much smaller than CVI, but it's called Reimagine Justice, and BJA is leading the way here. And they are already investing in neighborhoods in Newark, in Portland, in Greenville, South Carolina, and in Austin, Texas. And these are supporting innovative, community-driven approaches to address low-level safety issues and reduce the unnecessary burden on the justice system. We are also expanding the community's role in our response to crisis situations where behavioral health is the underlying cause. So 3 years ago, BJA invested in the Connect and Protect program. This supports co-responder trainings to get health professionals with law enforcement on site in response to 911 and 988 calls. So far, we've invested more than $50 million in 100 communities in 37 states. These approaches are helping to de-escalate crisis, avert unnecessary arrests, connect people to services, shrink the footprint of the justice system, and deliver better outcomes. And this approach should be the norm, not the exception. We are also scaling support for community-based services in the youth justice space to expand access to victim services, to address hate crimes, and in other areas across OJP portfolios. And a quick PSA here, many of these solicitations are open now, so take a look, ojp.gov, ojp.gov. There's even a new solicitation that just hit the street last week that focuses on technical assistance to build stronger CBOs, so take a look. Another strategy we've got here is the use of microgrants, and this is a new area for OJP. And here we're funding intermediaries to reach organizations that have the closest ties to impacted communities. So we know that these smaller neighborhood groups may be best positioned to deliver high impact interventions, but they might not have what they need to compete for large federal grants. so we are trying to change that. We have invested in intermediaries to provide both pass-through funding and technical assistance to help CBOs build their capacity to grow and sustain their work over the long term. We're taking this approach to a number of initiatives. For example, as part of CBI, we funded 7 intermediaries so far that are providing micro grants and hands-on assistance to hyper-local organizations in Southside Chicago, pockets of LA, Colorado, Louisiana, and Memphis, right here in DC, and in other jurisdictions. And we are expanding this micro grant strategy to reentry grants, to trauma recovery, to victim services, hate crimes, and other areas as well. And we believe this approach can be especially impactful if we resource the right intermediaries. So for example, the Latino Coalition for Community Leadership is an intermediary for both reentry grants and a CBI grant. And they support programs with fewer than 10 full-time staff and assets that are less than $500,000. And they're prioritizing organizations that are led by people with lived experience. One of their goals is to equip these CBOs so that they can apply for and manage grants over the long term, and they're having incredible success. So far, the organizations that they're working with have seen 400% to 500% increases in their budgets over the last 5 years. So kudos to them. I didn't know if Richard was in the room here, but they're doing incredible work. I also saw the impact of the micro grant strategy firsthand during a trip to LA. Fernando Rajon, who's leads the Urban Peace Institute, took us to Chapter 2, which is a small CBI organization doing outsized work on a shoestring budget. They are led by a wise director who has lost his loved ones to violence and is determined to save others. And Director Gerald P. Cabot, he told us just a heart-wrenching story while we were there about the death of a 4-year-old girl, and how Chapter 2, his small organization, stepped up to support her family at a time when they were devastated, lost, and overwhelmed with grief. Chapter 2's care and support knew no bounds. They planned the funeral. They covered the costs. They served as the pallbearers, and they laid this little girl to rest with dignity. The story that Director Cabot shared with us illustrates how CBOs are often the beating heartbeat of their neighborhoods, and they step up to fill whatever gap is needed, often on their own time and on their own dime. Now, Director Cabot also made a point when we were there to thank Fernando for the assistance he was getting, not only the grant money, not only the micro grant, but the training that they're getting so that they could grow their team of peace ambassadors. And he particularly talked about getting the training curriculum and how it served as a force multiplier, giving structure and guidance to this expanding nonprofit. Going to shift here to equity. Another really important element to our approach is a focus on equity. And you may recall that on President Biden's first day in office, he signed an executive order acknowledging our collective failure to invest in historically marginalized and underserved communities, and he directed federal agencies to lower the barriers to accessing federal resources. And the Department of Justice has developed a robust response here, and OJP has really brought this equity agenda to life. Specifically, we are giving priority consideration for funding to projects designed to advance equity and to applicants that can demonstrate that their capabilities and competencies are enhanced because they are a population-specific organization, a bipolar organization. And we have tried to share this message far and wide and expand our pool of applicants. And I'm really pleased to share that over the last couple of years, our applicant pool has expanded. Last year, we received over 900 applications from nonprofits that had not applied for OJP funds. And for those that were in line with the equity priority considerations, the vast majority were funded. It's a big breakthrough. Another different but important example that I want to lift up to is our Office for Victims of Crime. And this is Chris Rowe's leadership here. They began the process 2 years ago of revising the crime victim compensation guidelines. Heather Steve's here as well, to increase fairness and enable more people to be eligible for reimbursement, especially those in communities most impacted by violence. Our hope is that in the coming months, these new guidelines will be in place, affirming the reality that justice-involved individuals are too often also victims of crime, and that they are just as deserving of support and compensation as anyone else. On the staffing front, we are bringing in the perspective of community into our own space in a more intentional way. Over the last 3 years, OJP has grown the ranks of talented professionals who bring with them lived experience. We not only have brought back the Second Chance Fellowship, we've got 3 active fellows, and John Bay is actually here in the room today, but we've taken this model into other areas as well. Last year, we brought on a fellow to guide BJA's efforts to reduce the stigma for people in recovery. OJJDP is bringing on youth fellows to help shape technical assistance for Second Chance grantees. They're also engaging impacted young people as paid peer reviewers and as consultants to OJJDP, advising on ways to meaningfully, and authentically advise us on how we can do our work and partner better with youth. In addition, for the first time, my office now has on board a senior counsel for racial justice and equity in the form of one Linda Seabrook, who is here today. And as many of you know, and I've alluded to, our senior advisor for CBI, Eddie Bocanegra, comes to us directly from the field with vast experience and expertise, and serves as our own credible messenger to the field, the CBI field that we're working with. It's incredible to have him on board. We've even centered community in our science portfolios. Under the direction of Dr. Nancy Levine, who couldn't be here today, that NIJ is prioritizing inclusive and participatory research models, engaging with people who are closest to the issues under study, to lead focus groups, to conduct interviews, and to engage in data analysis. This approach gives us important new perspectives. It helps CBOs build their own research capacity and ensures that research findings will benefit the communities that the evidence is intended to serve in the first place. And I know we'll hear more about that from Jocelyn on the panel. And I want to be clear, though, I don't think for a minute that federal funding alone is a long-term solution. OJP investments amount to about $5 billion a year. It's a big amount, I understand that, but in comparison, state and local governments are investing $250 billion a year in state and local justice systems. And so while we celebrate new funding streams like the $100 million that's been dedicated each year recently to CBI, that level of investment pales in comparison to funding for the justice system. So imagine what it would look like if community-based services were funded at parity with the justice system. Think about neighborhood hubs that were staffed with professionals trying to break the cycle of violence and trauma, not just 1 or 2 programs serving an entire city, but in every neighborhood where there's need. Or crisis response centers, where behavioral health specialists were on hand to respond to any 911 or 988 call where there's a need. Or one-stop shops to offer training, placement, mentoring, education for anyone on demand coming home from prison, jail, or juvenile facilities. Or victim services available to all survivors, including those who have traditionally not been recognized as victims and have been denied support and assistance as a result. What would it feel like if law enforcement knew there were partners available not only to respond to crime and to crisis, but to work with them to tackle the underlying issues in a way that prevents violence, de-escalates conflict, addresses behavioral health issues, and disrupts the cycle of trauma and harm? Imagine the trust that could be built when community and justice system professionals have complementary roles that work together at scale towards a joint mission for shared safety. What we're trying to achieve here is a fundamental reimagining of public safety. How do we expand the pool of resources so that community investments begin to approach the scale of that of the justice system? How could we make this a reality? It would certainly take all of us. For federal funders, we can expand our pool of public safety partners to find ways to increase opportunities for investment in community-led coalitions and organizations. To my friends in philanthropy, you can leverage your flexible dollars to support communities in ways that the public dollars just can't. And you can also help tell stories that show the profound human impact of these investments to help change hearts and minds. The research community, you can continue to build the evidence and expand inclusive and participatory practices to help build research capacity and ensure that community-based partners benefit from participation in research projects. And to our law enforcement professionals, it may seem counterintuitive, but I think that you may be our greatest champions, because in a shared safety frame, some of those burdens are lifted and you are freed up to focus on the jobs that you signed up for, are trained for, and are sorely needed for. And CDOs, it is on you too to continue your critical and life-saving work, to be prepared to grow, to scale, and to evaluate your efforts so that states and cities can see that investing in you over the long term will save lives and create thriving cities, towns, and neighborhoods. And state legislators, city leaders, and county budget officials then have an opportunity to make upstream and longer-term investments to address scale and sustainability. So let us embrace the Square One Challenge to, quote, look to new places for more effective responses, to develop a framework that relies on community strength and reduces the explosive interactions of violence, poverty, and racial inequality. This was Square One's original call to us all. At OJP, we are using the levers that we've got to strengthen, to invest in, to support the role of community as co-producer of public safety. Let us broaden our coalition and build out a community ecosystem so that it is a central and lasting part of the public safety infrastructure. Thank you.
Those remarks, and I feel very grateful that we have you in the role where you are, and very, very glad that you're here and we're sharing that with us today as the starting point for the conversation we're going to have now. I will say, first of all, Bruce Western, our moderator, is not myself. He has been at LaGuardia Airport for the past 5 hours, still on the tarmac as of about 10 minutes ago, so unfortunately he will not be joining us today. I will be playing the role of Bruce Western, moderator. And it's my great, great pleasure to invite our panelists to come join us up here at the front of the room. We'll introduce folks. Before you want to come on up, and then I'll do introductions for everyone. That would be great. So we are very, very lucky to have today with us an incredible group of folks who have been working on these issues for a very, I should also say, we have seats here at the front. These folks will not need these chairs again, and so all of you backbenchers who would like to come forward, you can definitely hear a little better if you're up here, so feel free, don't feel embarrassed. It'll be much more comfortable and definitely you can hear better. So it's my great pleasure to introduce this group of folks who are with us here today, and I'll start down there. Pastor Mike McBride is the Executive Director for Live Free USA, which is a national organizing and social change network committed to ending the criminalization of people of color, reducing gun violence, and transforming the policing and criminal justice systems. Pastor Mike has also been a part of Square One's work from the very beginning, our very first public roundtable, and we're just honored to have you with us here. You've had an incredible influence, as you know, on the way that Square One's work has developed over the years, and we're just really, really grateful to have you here. Next to Pastor Mike is Jawanna, who is the founder of Guns Down Friday. She is a longtime educator and community activist in Prince George's County. Coming out of the U.S. Air Force for 6 years, she observed that the streets of Washington, D.C. were comparable to a war zone, and brought that thinking and that creativity to the work that she's been doing, founding Guns Down Friday to address the needs of families who've lost loved ones, and to mobilize communities to support one another and take action. And Guns Down Friday now operates in 5 DC neighborhoods and also in Prince George's County. Joanna, it's just such an honor to have you here today. We're really grateful. Next to Jawanna is Jocelyn Fontaine, who is the inaugural executive director of the Black and Brown Collective for Community Solutions to Gun Violence. You probably noticed Amy making eye contact with Jocelyn multiple times when the idea of research was mentioned. Jocelyn has been absolutely formative in the way that research is done in this country, and particularly in issues related to the justice system and communities. And her reach is far and wide, and it's just really exciting that she's bringing it to bear now in this recently founded collective. She also has another day job where she works as the Vice President of Strategic Program Development at the Urban Institute. Jocelyn, we're just really glad you're here. And last but not least, Ernest Cato III, who is the Chief of Public Safety for the Illinois Department of Corrections. He's been in that role for about a year, but previously had served for many years in the Chicago Police Department in a number of roles. And as you heard Amy mention, a lot of that work was really incredible creative leadership in partnership with communities to try to create real safety and justice. So we're just so grateful that you are here with us today. So I'm going to kick us off. We'll spend a little time talking today together and among the panelists, and then we'll have a little time for Q&A at the end. And then a reception afterwards, which will be another opportunity for all of us to discuss, grill the panelists, all of those things that happen during reception. So we're going to start off with Pastor Mike, and I want to, as I do that, I also want to mention a really exciting new report that has been prepared by Live for USA, written by Antonio Cedillo. Building a Mass Movement for Community-Led Public Safety is hot off the presses today, and this report is available on Square One's website at squareonejustice.org. It will also be available on Live Free's website, but we would encourage you to take a look at that. And I mention this now because, Pastor Mike, I want to invite you to tell us a little bit about your unique perspective on community-led safety and how the work that you do, which is around not only providing services but also organizing people to use their power to make change, how does that relate to creating and maintaining community-led safety?
Well, it's a gift to be here with certainly Square One, and to the Assistant Attorney General. Am I saying that right? The Assistant Attorney General? Amy, who we've known before her current role, always been a champion of this work, and just so grateful to have people in high places. Eddie and other folk who they high places. Give your nosebleed high, right? No. I will just say that I've been involved in this work long enough to remember when politicians at the highest level would, fuss us out of rooms for even bringing up gun violence. When law enforcement would accuse us of being hug-a-thugs, and when philanthropy would say this is not evidence-based. And so, the role of an organizer, among other things, is to never be content with the world as it is, but to always keep pushing for the world that we want to see. And so I've often been accused of being a consistent malcontent because I'm never happy with the progress that is made. But I think it's worthy of just taking a quick moment to celebrate that we have come a long way. And certainly there is still a long way to go. Hence the report that we've put out. Dr. Antonio Cedillo, who's been an early architect of our Live Free work, has really captured the heart of what we believe is important, that we still have not reached consensus in the United States of America, that we can reduce violence and crime in Black and brown, under-resourced, low-wealth communities without having to scale up unconstitutional, unaccountable law enforcement and carceral strategies. We've not reached that political consensus yet. We have reached a bit of a consensus that at least there ought to be some differentiation and some more tools that need to be unleashed. But we still have a ways to go to ensure that the worst conditions of Black and brown folks in this country need not always be met with punitiveness. And so this is what emerged out of our earliest days of organizing, when we realized that as faith leaders, as formerly incarcerated individuals, as people who live in communities overly impacted by violence and incarceration and criminalization, we realize that if the only tool we have in our tool belt is a hammer, everything will feel like a nail. Everything, literally. Even people who are trying to help would still get the full brunt of the hammer. And so our hope has been for the last 15, 20 years, how can we organize communities and organize supporters, elected officials, faith leaders, politicians, philanthropists, law enforcement leaders, everyone who is a stakeholder to have a transformed imagination, hence the wonderful work that I feel just blessed to have been involved with Square One, with Bruce and Katharine and Jeremy, who's somewhere around here, and everybody else, Suki, who really, I think, helped to create this space where we could have an expanded imagination. I'm a Black preacher, I go on and on and on, so I won't, but I'll just say that I do feel like the power of building mass mobilization to create the tipping point that will be permanent, right? Because right now I feel like we have a window. And I think we all should be honest about where we are. I don't know that it is a tipping point, it's a window with wonderful champions and people who understand this work. But if everything we've done can be undone in one election cycle, then we must acknowledge we still only have a window. While the consistent experience of many folks in our communities has been multi-generational in this regard, which means that a mass public movement requires a deep appreciation and investment in organizing people who are still living in communities overly impacted by violence, disenfranchisement, et cetera, that we must shift narratives that make the kind of imagination overly influenced by punitiveness. And then we must make permanent these ideas in local, state, and federal spaces where, just like a police department does not have to appeal to philanthropy every year to make their budgets meet, neither should the civilian-led public safety infrastructure of this country have to depend on the graciousness of Langlois Foundation, Ford Foundation, public welfare, and all the others to make our budgets meet. This, I think, is the work ahead of us as we acknowledge that, man, we've come quite a long way, and that journey has been very exciting, enthusiastic, and inspiring to have been a part of it, certainly to behold.
Pastor Mike, thank you very much.
And you emailed me that last night, by the way.
Nice work. Jawanna, tell us a little bit about your work, and I hear the echoes of some of the things that Pastor Mike just said and some of the things that you've been doing. I'd love to hear a little bit about that, and how do you help to create community-led safety? What does that mean to you, and what's needed to move it forward further?
Yeah, listening to Pastor Mike is funny because we do the same work, but just on different spectrums. So when I hear him, I'm just so motivated because I'm really on the ground, like working with the kids, working with youth, and working with families. And then I realize it's a whole other world. Like, it's the political side, it's the policing, and then it's the community. So yeah, just thank you for that, Pastor Mike. But yes, my name is Ms. Hardy. I run Guns Down Friday. A new family position I have is I work at Children's National. I'm the first violence intervention specialist at Children's, working with kids that are shot, kids that are injured in a fight, kids that are stabbed, and I'm honored to be in that position. Let's see, let me get my notes. I'm a little nervous, you guys. So one thing, I just listening, really strengthening the ecosystem. Like, we always expect one person to do it all: crime compensation, the police, the community, and if we're not working together, like, the system, it really is going to fail. Like, I think about a young man a 12-year-old who was shot last week in the stomach, trying to get resources for him. And I call the police, and they say he's a perpetrator. And I'm like, this kid is saying he's about to go shoot and kill someone when he gets out of here. and this kid receiving no support. So just, you know, really figuring out how the ecosystem can work for everyone. I think about the crime compensation in Maryland, which to me sometimes is non-existent. I think about the family that had to pay for the funeral and they got reimbursed 3 years later. I think about the young man who was shot. The person didn't get locked up, so 7 people died behind that. 7 more children died behind that one shooting, because where there's no justice, there's no peace. So just those little things. And another thing, you know, we give out a lot of money, and sometimes, a lot of times, that money does not reach the people that's affected the most. The biggest government grant I've applied for was a $15,000 grant, because I suffer with PTSD. I started this gun violence prevention because I saw so many children dying, and I just wanted to do something about it. I don't want to. To this day, I don't want to fill out a grant. I don't want to have to do paperwork, because it's so much more frustration put on my plate. So you know, to the point, I'd rather just do it without funding. And I often laugh, because when you put me next to $1 million corporation, you would think I was getting the same amount, but really I'm just doing it from the heart and because I care. So that's just, you know, a message I wanted to give. And I encourage you guys, you know, if people are saying they're doing things, to not just look at the papers and say, okay, it says they're doing this, they told us they're doing that. Come out to some of these things and really see what's going on, because you would be surprised at some of the things you see. You know, I listen to some of these big time organizations, and I'm like, if they really knew what these organizations were doing in the community, you know, it would just be different. So that's my little spiel. Thank you guys for all the work you do.
Thank you so much. Well, that's a great segue, Jocelyn, to hear a little bit from you about the role that research can play in communities, and some of the things that Ms. Hardy is flagging that are missing pieces or missing steps or misunderstandings in this work. What's the role of research in creating community-led safety?
Thank you, and I just want to, I feel very honored to be sitting here with you all, and I sort of always like a little bristle with that word, but I just like the passion that you all are bringing into the space, the leadership, having people in the right and high places. It's just incredibly inspiring to be in space with you all, and appreciate that I'm able to be here with you in partnership for this really important work. So I sort of think about myself, and I think about the role of research to be in service of this life-saving work, right? So I got into this work as a researcher with a level of curiosity of just trying to understand, why are certain things this way? Why is the crime concentrated here? Why is the footprint of the justice system so broad? Why do the families that are getting harmed and killed, why do they look like mine? Why are they my cousins? So that brought me into this research space, but with a curiosity about it, but with a particular focus, right? That how can I use research to better understand this in order to drive solutions to make it better for people, for families, to make the justice system more equitable, smaller, more humane, all of those things. And so I really feel passionate about the role of research, but that it's evidence in support of this kind of work. That doesn't mean, of course, that research is just to sort of say, what you're doing is working, so keep doing it, or that you have all the answers and the solutions. But how can we use data collection and analysis and sort of the ways that we're trained as researchers to have a healthy level of skepticism, but bringing a systematic process to understanding the world? How can we use that in service of communities, in service of people, in service of families, to make lives better? And so that's how I think about the role of research. Research has its limits. It cannot do everything. There are certain programs, interventions that cannot be studied with a specific level of rigor such that we can say that this caused this, right? So this intervention had an impact or caused this thing. The world, these interventions sometimes are too messy, they're too small, the research tools aren't for the given question, but there's still all these ways in which research can be used to help tell a story. So it is even just, having researchers doing focus groups, doing interviews, seeing things with their own eyes, with the level of sort of independence and a level of distance to help tell the story of what the work can look like on the ground, to sit in the tables that we sit in, to tell the story about what's working, what's not, to bring that back, to say, this is what can be done better, or have you thought about this? To think about how work that's happening in one place is related to a project and intervention that I saw in another place, and maybe that can help us all do the work better. But I really do believe strongly, and this is sort of the older that I get and the more that I'm in this work, is that it really is in service of the interventions, the programs, the work that's happening on the ground. How can we help lift up those stories to make it all better, to make our country better, to make people's lives better? So I am a believer in participatory research methods and inclusive methods, definitely, but I also, know that numbers, quantitative, administrative data, all of that stuff is important as well. That we use a level of rigor and humility in order to be able to tell those stories. And like I said, it's a range of different tools that we can use as researchers to help do that, but it's important work in order that for all of us to sort of get this right. And all of this is all of the folks that Amy sort of laid out, our justice system professionals, our community organizers, our community-based organizations. It's all of us. Research can be helpful in telling the story about how to get this better, how to get this right, again, to improve lives. So thank you for the question, and I appreciate being here.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you so much. Well, last but certainly not least, it's wonderful to have the perspective of someone who's, I think you were talking about hammers and nails. The police institutions have been the hammer, but not to really mess up this metaphor. Sometimes in the hammer there are nails that are trying to, I'm not sure, who are finding ways to create space to ask questions, to push differences within existing structures. And as Amy alluded to, that's part of the way in which change happens. It happens from outside, it happens from the inside. Chief, share with us a little bit about your experience and the ways in which the role that you have played can contribute to community-led safety.
Fortunately, I've been horrible as a carpenter, so I'm horrible with a hammer. But I feel blessed to sit here today to come from the city of Chicago to share the same experiences with others throughout our country. And it is definitely a problem throughout our country. I've been policing, I policed for 32 years. I rose through the ranks to chief. I actually commanded one of the worst, let's not use the word worst, one of the most difficult neighborhoods in the city of Chicago. Not only did I work in that area, I was born and raised in that area. So I had a real strong sense of what a young black man had to deal with. You walk out the door, you look to the left, you see a gang to your left. You walk out the door, you look to your right, you see a gang to your right. You walk straight ahead, man, there's the police. So to navigate that each day, that's how I pretty much grew up. So I had a pretty much idea of what young men of color, how they had to navigate through neighborhoods. So now, whoever thought I would become the police? I become never thought that. So now I become a police. And now at the very beginning of my career, I'm policing the traditional way of policing, which wasn't a very good way of policing. As I started moving up the ranks as a homicide detective, I started learning more about families, going into homes that looked like my home. So right away I knew this is the way that I want to police. So now I started getting promoted. Now I get a command. I get a command of one of the toughest districts in the city of Chicago. 2016 homicide rates were over 800. Now, my resources, I was told clearly that I wasn't going to get many resources because they had to be focused in another area. And I understood that. What I learned right away was that policing is not the #1 tool that's going to reduce violence. Policing comes secondary. You have to empower the community to help themselves. How do you empower the community to help themselves? You have to have confidence in you. They have to trust you. You literally have to get out there and understand people. So enforcement, I'll say it clearly, occupying neighborhoods does not work. And when I say occupying neighborhoods, I just mean countless stops, just responding to calls, pulling folks over. It doesn't work. It's gonna calm it down a little bit, but what happens is that you become that hammer. And what happens sometimes, you cast a huge net. And I equate, you cast a huge net like you're tuna fishing. And when you're tuna fishing with that huge net, you get dolphins. And when you start to get dolphins, you start to build a bad rapport in the neighborhood. So what I learned right away, I started thinking about it. I now have to put my strategy, folks who work in the community. Now, you spoke early about different groups that come in communities, they're probably not doing the real work. What I started doing, if any group that wanted to come into my district had to have brick and mortar because of that. And what I learned is that if you were invested in a neighborhood, you had brick and mortar in the neighborhood, I could hold you accountable. You had nowhere to escape from because now we have to have a conversation. So what I really did at that point, I started writing it into my strategy. But something came along down the road, I was given a gift, violent intervention. And I'll tell you, at the very beginning, I was afraid. Because now I had to work with individuals that had caused the problem in the community. Now I had to give them my trust, they had to give me their trust. Let me put it to you this way, after we developed that relationships, I saw my homicide rates decrease, I saw my shootings decrease, and I love talking about this number here. I saw my arrests decrease. The number of arrests decreased to me was very valuable because that meant that we were focusing in the right places and the right people. We weren't just making just arrests. If you look at certain numbers in certain areas, arrests may be high. Guess what's still high? The violence. It's still high. Empowering the community to help themselves restores a lot of trust and it helps reduce violence. How do you empower the community? You include the community. You include the community in your strategies and your plans. You're not warning them. If I decided that an area was probably engulfed in violence and shooting, somebody said, well, let's do a seatbelt safety mission. Tell the community we're going to do a seatbelt safety mission. Tell them. What does that do? Well, one, it alerts those in the area who's not causing any issues that it's going to be in that particular area. It also alerts those who are doing wrong in that area, they may not want to be there. We have to communicate to those who is involved in those communities. Because if we don't care. You have to be transparent. If you're not transparent and open, no one's going to knock on your door and tell you, hey, I have a problem. When they used to say, Commander Cato, I'm having a problem right over here. I say, oh, really? I said, well, do me a favor. Bring me at least 5 more people off your block. Then let's have a discussion. 5 more people show up. Now we'll sit down, we'll talk about what's going to go on in the area. I said, next, in 2 weeks, let's have another meeting. Bring me another 5 more people. Now I have 10 people. Now what we're doing, we're going to come up with a strategy of what they need to do on their block. Something as simple as the timing of coming out and having a conversation. So I say, well, all of you are probably watching the same show. When this commercial comes on, I want everyone to come out and just walk around the block. Now at the same time that they're doing there, I'm giving directed foot patrols, meaning that officers are now walking also, and they're having a conversation with those on the block. So it's a positive conversation. So the goal is you can't have community here, police here, working in different silos, working against each other. Violent intervention. I can't say enough about the violent intervention groups. The goal with violent intervention groups, you got to provide them information. You got to let them know what's going on with not the expectation of receiving something. Because I would say this now, police, we are, put ourselves in dangerous situations. We do. Police officers are killed, trying to protect communities. For violent intervention, guys, you gotta think about it. If a violent person from a violent intervention group is thought to be providing information to law enforcement, they could lose their lives also. So you have to be very careful with that. Respect. I can't say enough about policing and respecting the communities that you serve. We talk about cultural diversity quite often, but do we really practice it? Equity was talked about early on. Every community is not treated the same. In Chicago, many years ago, we had multiple mass shootings, meaning that large crowd gatherings could be in an area, someone would drive by, and they'd fire a handgun, shooting probably about 8 people. Never listed as a mass shooting. You go in an affluent neighborhood, 3 people get shot, and it's a mass shooting. Every community should be treated on the same grounds, regardless of the economic situation that it's in. And what we found in certain neighborhoods in the city of Chicago also, one high-paced tax-based neighborhood, they get certain police service. Where a low tax-based neighborhood, certain things are, you just expect that to happen in that neighborhood. All babies aren't created equal. Talked early on about a baby being shot. If we don't take care of our children, we'll all be sitting here again 30 years from now. I guarantee you. Schools have to be treated the same equally. I won't start getting into that. But policing and communities have to work as one team. I believe in the one team effect. So when I would drop my strategies, I also drew in my strategies, included how I was utilizing the community and how I put them first. Community first, police is secondary to assist.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And I appreciate that's a bigger conversation on education, but it is all connected, as we all know, so I invite that in as well. Pastor Mike, I want to turn back to you. I mean, we're hearing some really specific situations and ideas. A lot of the work that you've been doing has involved the type of community organizing that you were telling us about before. At Square One, there are a number of values that we look to guide our work and try to identify common ground and paths forward. Power sharing is an enormously important one, and we've heard that a lot here. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like and how that helps to move things forward in the work that you do and how you can see that changing over time.
Live Free emerged around 2008 or 9 out of California's kind of organizing space to champion what was popularly being called ceasefire, whether it's from Boston or whether it was from Chicago. And I'd been introduced to the work through the Eugene Rivers, Jeff Brown, Timmy Gross kind of tree of the CVI universe. And so since 2008 or 9, we've actively organized in well over 25 jurisdictions, attempting to educate, mobilize, and reach enough power in the city to implement and fund these efforts. I would say less than 5 cities welcomed these efforts with open arms. Even still to this day, right? Over the course of our 15 years plus, which just is to say that the role of organizing is about leveling the very real power imbalance that operates in cities, in states, and at the federal level to ensure that people have the ability to have self-determination and influence on how their tax dollars are being used to create a certain outcome. Organizing is different from advocacy, at least in the way we understand it, because we have found that advocacy can be done on behalf of a group, while we believe organizing must be done by and with those that are directly impacted. Y'all see that distinction?
Yeah.
Right? I remember when mass incarceration became a thing, and all of a sudden you had all these people who were not directly impacted, never incarcerated, and even in their own city wouldn't walk past a person with a criminal conviction. But all of a sudden they became experts around ending mass incarceration after reading Michelle Alexander's wonderful book. And now they created firms and foundations and ACL. Yeah, everybody was just, and it's kind of happening similarly in CVI, right? Where people who were literally less than 10 years ago telling us, oh, this doesn't work, are now experts. And so what's happening, interestingly enough, is we are becoming very top heavy on what I believe is TA and advocacy, and very underfunded and invested on organizing, which is necessary in every jurisdiction. Why? Because if people in neighborhoods are not organized to reimagine how their own lived conditions can be changed with a different, consistent form of civic engagement and self and co-governance. If that organizing work is not done, when the political winds shift, the resources go away and the advocates turn to the next hot topic, communities will be left still powerless or not with enough power to sustain and make permanent the important revelations that hopefully research, experience, goodwill, and partnerships have demonstrated is a way forward to have a more just, inclusive, and safe and secure community. And so organizing for us takes seriously that we must be very intentional about finding individuals, families, communities who are directly impacted, and appreciate that not everyone in our communities is directly impacted or driving violence. They may be indirectly impacted, meaning I have never been shot. Luckily, I bobbed and weaved a few times and the bullets didn't hit me, touch your neighbor, or whoever was shooting at me had bad aim. And I'm grateful for that. But I have family members in my direct and indirect family, community, etc., who have been shot. Their impact of being shot requires my collective resources, trauma, to respond. I think it's really important for us to keep imagining that these individuals must be organized out of their own pain, trauma, experience. Why? So they can see themselves as agents and with agency to help reimagine and make permanent these kinds of shifts that I think are necessary to save this country. It is important to appreciate with all that we've accomplished, this has still been one of the most deadliest years ever on record of officer-involved shootings and killings in this country. So while crime spiked and now is going down, we're still seeing that the policing apparatus in this country is still overly violent, lethally so to our community members. What does that mean? That means that we still don't have the kind of shift in how we respond even to violence that is real and or that is in some cases, I won't say imagined, but is perceived. And so the organizing work is really important in helping us to build consensus, tipping points, to turn the no's of a mayor into a yes by packing rooms of hundreds of individuals directly impacted and laying these strategies out. To turn the no's of law enforcement leaders into yeses by helping them appreciate this is the will of the people. By turning city council votes from no's into yeses. This is done by pushing, often, at times, people who claim to be our political champions, our political allies. Sometimes you have to put pressure on them to have a Jesus moment, a conversion moment, an aha moment, come to the altar and get saved. I don't know. Change your way of thinking so we can figure out a way forward. And I think that is what we're trying to articulate, not only in the report, but in this kind of way forward. How do we ensure we don't lose the important organizing? Because I will say, everything we've accomplished to this point has had a very consistent push of organizing. It hasn't been on the backs and the strengths of just practitioners, right? And so if we're going to sustain it, we have to invest and ensure that organizing pushes and changes political norms, governance strategies, and better and more importantly, it empowers people to stay involved in governance, in democracy, in ensuring that they have a voice, they have the ability to decide, not just on voting day, but in between elections as well.
Thank you, Pastor Mike. Jocelyn, I want to turn to you on the heels of that. I mean, Pastor Mike, you're talking about really deep culture change, narrative change. You know, your examples of the numbers that we are familiar with, which are measuring some very specific, perhaps, murder rates or violence rates in particular ways, but are missing the information about officer-involved shootings. That's not part of what you read in the news every day. Here in DC, we read every day about other types of violence in communities, but we don't read about officer-involved shooting violence in the same way. Jocelyn, thinking about the role that research can play, and even what are the questions we're even asking and answering, how does that come together as we think about this type of sustained shifting of power that Pastor Mike's talking about?
So I want to say that, well, I always appreciate you, but what you're forcing me to do in this moment is like really broaden the way that I certainly think about community engagement and what inclusion really looks like, right? So that we really are including the people, right? So there's ways in which, particularly and I will answer your question, in the research space where community engagement, including the community, right? And like has become the thing that we're saying, and like, what does that even mean? What is the community? I'm separate from the community. Am I a part of it? If I, just, but what I so appreciate your comments and what you're talking about is just like really forcing us like at the people who are living in these neighborhoods, experiencing directly, indirectly, violence, exposure to it. How are we including them in this process of, reimagining, shifting power? So thank you for that, for calling that. And I want to say that to continue to sort of do my part in the research spaces that I'm in to make sure that I'm staying sort of true to that, and call to the other researchers that are in the space too. But it's a very good reminder that it's quite easy to go to just the policy advocates or the people who are sort of speaking the loudest, and do they represent, are they of the people, in sort of the way that you're talking about. So thank you for that. So with my long preamble, I forgot a little bit about the question, but you asked me,
thinking about just as we look at the different things the different information that we have available to us as a community, as a society, what's the role of research? Pastor Mike was talking about officer-involved shootings, even thinking about how do we measure the idea that it's not just, are there numbers of particular types of violence going up or down, but are we looking at the ways that power is shifting? Do we know what that's even?
Yeah. So I think my response to that would be in what ways are researchers or sort of research communities sort of asking and answering the questions that are most important to the work that you're doing, or and I'll go back to like sort of the community more broadly, right? Are the sort of the research agendas, the questions, the designs, all of those things, again, is that sort of in service of shifting the power, in service of people whose lives, communities that are at stake, right, and who stand to gain the most from more information, more evidence, more access, all of those things. And so that's how I would sort of want to answer that. And I think that's about us getting closer, right? So researchers getting closer to community, right? So there's not this distance that, I'm sitting here and you are the community, but just more proximity, which is hard to do. Some researchers are better than others at it and more interested in doing that. The academy doesn't teach you how to do inclusive research or how to be more proximate. I was telling this story at the Community Violence Intervention Conference in April about how myself, even as a, I think I'm a pretty smart Black woman I still had to learn how to get better about these things, how to be closer, what does it look like to be in more proximity and to be doing research that's helping answer questions that are important to you and to your work. And that's not to dismiss, right, also answering questions that are important to justice system stakeholders and that as well. But she's not here, but there's a woman, her name's Patrice Sutton from the DC Justice Lab, a local organizing group here. And she said to me at a community engagement roundtable, she said it to the entire group, but at a community engagement roundtable that I hosted, it's a year ago now, she was like, I hate when researchers just tell us the things we already know, right? And it's such a simple statement, but it sat with me for a year and will continue that, she's like, what are you bringing me, right? I'm trying to do more work, better work in service of, and you're telling me stuff I already know. Wow, right? And that's how I think about that. Are we doing work that is answering the questions, is focused on the problems, the solutions that people who are trying to make change want answers to? That's how I should be holding myself accountable. And once I answer those questions or find that information, bringing it back to them so that they can better do the thing that they want to do.
Ernest, I want to turn to you following on that and thinking about, you talked in your previous response and we just heard from Jocelyn, the ways that we can, the ways that stakeholders who are in different institutional settings can engage directly with community members often requires breaking through a lot of mistrust, perhaps from both directions, right? Talk to us a little bit about how have you done that? How do you see that working? Where have you seen barriers that it was difficult to get around in terms of really building that legitimate connection that allows you to have this information and this give and take?
Well, I notice when we talk about community and policing, we say community and policing. Police have to be part of the community. In order to get a clear understanding of what's going on in the community, police have to become vulnerable. And they have to literally understand the community that they're serving. That means that when you have meetings, the meeting shouldn't be community and the police. It should just be a community meeting. Now, for me to be able to break barriers, I had to become vulnerable. I had to literally just put myself out there. I had to actually commit. I had to go within the neighborhoods that were having issues, not to expect the neighborhoods to come to me. So I knew that I had a problem on a certain block, so I took the resources to that block. I knew that I had issues within the community that weren't being addressed and folks on those blocks weren't reporting it, so I had to go to that block. So to do something simple as, I just remember once, well, Commander, if we had jobs, we wouldn't be out here. Oh, is that only the problem? Is that the solution? Not a problem. So what I did, I got together with my staff, and we literally had a job fair on the most dangerous area within the district. And I asked my staff, do not advertise it, do not put it on social media, because what I didn't want to happen was someone who knew how to fill out an application, someone who had a resume to come to those corners. So we got a couple of businesses to come out. I don't want to name them because we don't want to do no advertising here, but they came out, they set up shop on the corner, and it would have brought a tear to your eye because the line was probably about 2 blocks long. 2 blocks long of individuals that I knew there were problems in the community. Now, what I learned was when they got up to the laptops to fill out the applications, they couldn't navigate it. And they became frustrated. That became a great opportunity for me and my staff to build a bond. So I hit my sergeant on the shoulder, get some guys over there, and push the buttons for them. And walk them through the application process. That went a long way. Because now I had an officer sitting with an individual he knew was probably selling drugs, helping him push the buttons for the application. So that was one process. We called something called Take It to the Streets, meaning that we simply went out there and started having conversations. We created something called Hip Hop Tuesday. Hip Hop Tuesdays, I opened up my our conference room area in the station, and I made it a rec center for children. Every Tuesday, my rec center was filled with children. It was even to the point once one mom came in, "You got my kid locked up in here." She's screaming. I said, "What's wrong?" She goes, "I heard my son was here. He's under arrest." So let me look at the law. "No, your son not here." I said, "Man, will you don't go for a walk with me?" Walked in the room. "Oh, that's him over there. I'll be right back." I said, "Oh, no, no babysitting service. You got to sign him in." The bottom line is that we created an atmosphere for children to come. Now, that went a long way also, because now those children had a relationship to the officers within the district. Now, from that, I was able to recruit those same children to create my Explorers program. We had the largest Explorers program in the city. To this day, we have volunteers who are in that Explorers program come back to assist. We even had officers to help these kids through the process of getting into school. That's one process. With the seniors, we went out we knocked on the seniors' doors and had conversations with the seniors. Schools, we sat down with all the principals in the district and had a bi-weekly meeting with all the principals to learn what was going on in school and what children needed what resources, what children weren't going to school, what children were involved with gangs. So we broke the barriers because we took it to the streets. We didn't wait for the community to come in because it wasn't happening. In some communities, they're just used to the violence and they expect nothing to be done. You have to go to them. But again, it's a community effort that includes the police. The police are part of the community. And if the police don't take the time to become part of the community, you're never going to get that trust. Being part of the community doesn't necessarily mean making an arrest. Being part of the community is asking someone, "You need a loaf of bread? You need a ride? If it's raining, you need a ride?" But at the same time, I would tell folks who live in the community, sometimes you can say hello to the police as they're driving by. Even to the point, I asked the community once, "Would you mind hanging signs up in your window saying that we support the police?" And somebody goes, "Commander Kate, I tell you what, I hang up signs saying we support the 15th district," which was the district that I was commander of. I said, "That'll work." This is what I found. Every sign that had every window that had a sign that said the 15th district on that block, more police drove through that block area. So police felt good going in that area. I said, "Wait a minute." I would look at the numbers. I said, "We're not getting the numbers that we had before over there." You take a ride, you see all the blue signs. So the police, it's like a give and take. Police also have to feel comfortable that you want them there. So you have to create an atmosphere where both, as the police become part of the community, and the community enjoys having the police in the area, you start having that trust.
So we thank you very much. So we've heard about some different ways in which trust can be built. And Ms. Hardy, I want to give you the last word before we open up for a few quick questions before we wrap up. Not surprisingly, this is a rich and full conversation that could go on for a lot longer than we have today. But just thinking about some of the things that we've heard here about the ways in which community leadership can be supported, needs to be supported. We heard about that from Amy's remarks, from the chief, from Jocelyn, from Pastor Mike. From where you sit, doing this work day in and day out, working directly with young people, the children, where does this land with you? What would you say to us now, as in terms of what is it that is needed to really support you as you and your community partners create safety?
So when it comes to community, and like I said, I work at the hospital and living in DC, being in the military, my view on gun violence sometimes is a little different. A lot of times we see majority African Americans affected. But one of the first deaths I saw was a Caucasian young man. And then I think about, we say community. The people on my board, they're Caucasian and they've lost people to gun violence. So I feel like it used to be just, a one race thing, but here in DC, everyone's affected. You could be sitting at, going out to dinner and you lose your life. So I think about, one of the social workers I work with, she loves working with the kids. She's a guru. And I took her to a meeting, and they didn't want her in the meeting. She lives in DC. She's one of the hardest working social workers you'll ever meet. Because of the way she looked, they didn't want her a part of the meeting. I spent a lot of time just fighting for not color, but just for people affected by gun violence. And when it comes to just listen to him in the community policing, I think about the young man who was shot in the stomach. And with crime compensation, you have to, in order to get help, you have to talk to the police. And if you talk to police, you're considered a snitch in your neighborhood. So it broke my heart because this little boy said, "Miss Hardy, I'd rather die than to talk to the police." And I'm like, no, you guys need safe housing. Like, this is the only way, you can get help is if you talk to the police and let them know what's going on. I even tried to, talk to the police, and they're like, "Miss Hardy, we have to talk to him directly." So, it's a lot of red tape, and, I don't know how the police and community can work together. We definitely need to figure that out, but, it's hard being from the community, because I feel that way, but the perpetrators, they not coming out. Their mothers will come out, their cousins, sisters, brothers. If they not in any trouble at the time, they'll come out. But the people that are most affected, they're not coming out. They're not going to these events. They're not coming out. They're afraid.
Thank you. Well, that just, back to what you started us with, Pastor Mike, the ways in which the shifts in power are the things that can change the broader structure so that people do feel safe and are able to. We are very close to the end of our time. I will invite, if one or two folks want to ask a question, please, there's so much expertise in this room that it would actually be great to hear from everyone, but if you could keep your questions really short so we have a moment with our panelists, and then we'll wrap up and continue the conversation outside. Does anybody have a question they want to ask of anyone on the panel?
Don't all speak at once.
That's going to scare you all. Go ahead.
This is for Ms. Hardy, because you just spoke on the term snitch. How do we change that connotation in our communities to make the police and the community members more inclusive?
That's a long road. Two, like Pastor Mike, he's somebody I trust. I work directly with perpetrators. We have to work together, come together, because some people can talk to the police. It's some people that's higher up. It's okay for Pastor Mike to go and talk to, for them to conversate and figure out what's going on in the community. But on another note, I have to trust him because I'm working directly with the perpetrators, and so I can't go there. It's so much history and trauma. I tried. I'm like, look, the police, they would ride with a cop. They're like, "Miss Hardy, we ain't ride with no cop, and now you look like a snitch, Miss Hardy." So it's like, all right,
with him either.
But I'll have Pastor Mike, or I'll have such and such connect with that person, and you guys navigate and come back and let us know if it's safe, because they just, you with this field with so much money, and you don't know who to trust anymore. Some officers you can trust. You can trust that district, but it might be one cop in there that's just that'll come around there and piss everyone off, and it makes you not trust anyone in that platoon or in that district. So it really takes good people. Those good people, they gotta talk to the police.
But I think we've inverted the word snitch, historically that word emerges out of law enforcement based people in communities who would bring information back to the police in a way that would destabilize the community. And now we talk about snitching as if it's a problem of the community. I think we need to continue to have a historical view of what leads to criminalization that destabilizes communities to the point where vigilante violence, which is the retaliatory violence that is often, I mean, we don't describe Pookie shooting back at someone that shot as him as vigilante violence, right? But there is often a cycle of violence that has been historical, that in many cities and jurisdictions, community members are aware of law enforcement's either involvement in furthering some of that conflict or not being as enthusiastic about, de-escalating that. Now, I'm not accusing, present folks of that, but there is a history of that in our communities. And so I just think it's really important for us to keep historicizing, if we're talking about a solution. If we're just talking about being overly sentimental in our conversations, which I think we do a lot of, like saying things make each other feel better, then I think we can probably reach for false conclusions. But there is a historical through line around why trust in communities with community members is still so fraught. It is not because the community just has this inability to trust people. It's because there is evidence, historically and still today, that not enough people in the system have figured out a way to have mutual power sharing and security, etc., procedural justice, all these other words that we couldn't talk about today because we just don't have the time. But there's a lot, I think, conversations that could happen, and I think that having those conversations and also being honest about the in-between, that's why I think the CVI work is so powerful, because it actually helps us to create another information flow that does not require that direct connection. If the goal is to reduce violence and crime, how do we create other kinds of constructions to do so while we work on the more intractable problems that may take a generation or so to solve? At least that's my take on it.
When I hear the word snitching, I think of a cultural issue, and it goes kind of back to what the Rev's talking about. I think there have been a lot of failures when it's come down, when folks have stood up, and I think we have let them down sometimes because of what happens. What happened after they came forward. We have to do better when information is given to law enforcement, and it's just not necessarily the police department, it's the legal system. We have to take better care of people when they do provide that information, because if we don't take care of that, you're going to continue to have with that. So that's when I go back to empowering the community, taking care of the community, receiving that information. When you get that information, how do you take care of the information? Not everything needs to be told to everyone. How do you protect someone when they come forward, whether it's the victim or a witness? We have to do a better job taking care of witnesses and victims. Not everything has to be said that John Doe said this. How do we utilize it? So there is a failure there. I will admit that as a homicide detective, I've seen it. So you're right, we have to take better care of that. And when you look at the words that you can go all the way back to slavery and think about someone who was hidden in there just to tell them what was going on in that area. So there's a historical problem with it. We have to do a better job of taking care of people.
I'm gonna wrap us up here. I'm not seeing too many burning questions, but except for one. Go ahead.
Just one quick
Yeah,
question.
please. Go ahead.
In considering the history of policing and everything that has been mentioned, my question is to you. The police often has a clear mission in focusing outside of their own community. And we see a lot of initiatives going to these individuals, building relationships with community. But my true challenge has always been, is there accountability within the police department in itself? So what proactive actions do you believe needs to be taking place so that the police in itself, as a community within themselves, can be more accountable to pretty much minimize the realities of what we're seeing in our everyday communities?
That's such a huge question, but you're right. Transparency is very important. Accountability is very important. Policing practices right now are trying to do a better job at that. I think that as time goes on with the younger generation that's coming up, I think there will be a better job than that. I think in the past, early on when I started coming up, you did have certain codes where folks wasn't making the right reports that should be written. And that's why we have a lot of problems when you start using the word snitch again. Accountability and transparency are very important for trust. So that's a dialogue you're not going to stand off in the corner and talk about for the next month. But you are correct for bringing that up. But I think now, as time goes on, I think we're going to see a better job in policing with that. Just by sitting here having that question. Look, I don't even have no problem trying to answer it for you now. 30 years ago, I would have a problem trying to answer that question for you.
And just to piggyback, accountability, not just for the police department, but a lot of the CBI work needs, some accountability. Like, what are people really doing with this money? Like, where is it really going? Where, some inspections, better inspections need to be taking place. And one more thing, I think I see Reverend Judy back there. Is that Mama Joe? Is that Mama Joe? Back there? No? Okay. Yes, but
Who
yeah.
is that? Now we need to know.
Oh, she's a guru in the community. She does a lot of work in DC. There's not a lot of women in this work, so when I see women that's doing the work in DC, I just always applaud because it's not easy being a woman in this field. So.
Yes. Thank you to this incredible panel. Hearing all of the things that have come up today, thinking about the connections between our history and our current practices and our future, it's just really exciting and inspiring to hear the work that's happening, the ways that truth-telling, the ways that power sharing, the ways that centering the humanity of every person involved is really moving us forward. This is the work that Square One is proud to support and learn from all the time. We're so grateful to every one of you all, enormously grateful to AAG Solomon and her incredible team. I want to remind folks again, you can see this paper released today by Live for USA on Square One's website, squareonejustice.org. In mid-June, you will get the next paper in this series, which is written by Amy Solomon and her colleagues Betsy and Brent at the Department of Justice OJP. So be on the lookout for that. We have your email addresses. We'll make sure you know when it comes out. But we're really just so delighted and honored to be able to be a part of this conversation, continuing to elevate this incredible expertise and thoughtfulness. And very grateful to all of you and to all of you all for being here. Thank you, and join us for food and drink and continued conversation out in the entry room here. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Katharine Huffman. I'm the Executive Director of the Square One Project, also a Managing Principal